Most of the world is run by dictators. But have you ever wondered what a dictator was like before he became a dictator? Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party is following the strategy of Imperial Japan in World War II, right before it attacked America. These are the Pacific Island nations, strategically located for China to project military power against Taiwan, or even someday against the U.S. At the center of China's campaign is Solomon Islands. Through bribery and corruption, China helped set up this man, Manasseh Sogavare, as prime minister. But given that he's postponing elections, you can see he's more of a dictator than anything else. Sogavare signed a secret security pact with China that could one day bring a Chinese military base to the islands. And his riot police are now being trained by China. Now, if you've been watching, you know we started a crowdfunding campaign to bring Sogavare's nemesis, pro-democracy leader Daniel Suidani, to Washington, D.C. to warn the U.S. government about China's dangerous influence. If you need a refresher on that, I'll leave a link to that episode below. And joining Mr. Suidani in D.C. was his policy advisor, Celsus Talifilu. They're both from the same province in Solomon Islands and share many of the same Christian values and concerns about the Chinese Communist Party. But the interesting thing about Mr. Talifilu is that before becoming Mr. Suidani's advisor, he was Sogavare's advisor. And he was actually there for much of Sogavare's rise to power. And he saw all the skeletons in the closet. I interviewed Celsus Talifilu when we were in D.C. about his time with Sogavare and how CCP elite capture actually works. Well, thank you for joining me today.
It is indeed a pleasure for me to able to see you in person. I'm a great fan of your show online, and I've been educating myself a lot about the things that have been discussed in your shows, and the humor that is developed in that platform, which is, I find it very, very educational.
Well, thank you for that. But I'm really curious. So you used to work for Sogavare, correct?
Right, yeah. I used to work for him during he is the prime minister twice. So I worked under his leadership, then he lost through emotional confidence, and so I worked with another prime minister, and then him again this time. So I worked with him under his current leadership.
I'm curious, what's your sense of the man?
He has a personality of not being very interactive. He keeps to him a lot, keeps to himself, and I think he is not the person who is outgoing. He's very reserved in the ways he interacts with even the politicians. Of course, he says he got involved in a lot of jokes, but just looking at how he engages with other members of parliament, he always has that reservation of staying by himself and allowing people to go to him.
So are you surprised at all about his turn towards authoritarianism of working with the Chinese Communist Party?
I'm not surprised at all. I see it coming. That kind of behavior and the conversations that I've heard within the corridors of the Prime Minister's office when I was there, it's just a fulfillment, I suppose.
Well, I know the Solomon Islands was supposed to have elections this year, but that's now changed. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yes, that there has been an amendment to the Constitution, and those that have supported the amendment and end up being paid by Chinese money, and that's being all published. 39 members of parliament, of the 50 members of parliament, the 39 who made up the two-thirds requirement for the amendment of the Constitution to move the life of Parliament for the next 7 months, have been rewarded for their actions.
And what was the excuse again for delaying the election?
The popular excuse that was given was because Solomon Islands will have these two big events happening in one financial year, the election, the national general election, and the Pacific Game. Pacific Game is a game that all the Pacific Island countries participated in. It's like a mini Olympic for the Pacific region. So the argument that was put forward by the current Prime Minister and the government is this is very costly to handle the two events, two big events in a year. Therefore, let's allow the sport to take place and amend the constitution to delay parliament for another 7 months.
That's very convenient for Sogovare.
Of course, of course.
And what I couldn't believe was when Australia heard about this, the response was, "Oh, you're short on money. We'll give you some extra money for the games, not for the election, but for the games."
That's right. Like Australia, first of all, supported the games, and then when public at large was raising concerns, before the amendment was made, just the next day, Australia announced help that they can help with the election, but it was too late. The amendment has already been in Parliament. But surprisingly, they have supported the games first.
That's incredible. I'm curious, how did you end up working with Mr. Suidani, who has been, when did you first hear about him, what he was doing to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party, going from Sogavare to his major opponent? How did that happen?
Yeah, what happened was I personally of the opinion that when I was Prime Minister when all these things happened, it was not honest. It was done using institutions of a state that should produce good things for the people, but this being in a way hijacked by political interests. So as a Malaysian, as an indigenous Solomon Islander, having read about a lot of things to do with China, there is that concern that I need with the wealth of knowledge I've had with governance and things like that. I think the best way for me is to help out, protect the province that I'm from. That's why I end up with Suidani and until now.
And what do you think will happen if Sogavare and the Chinese Communist Party are able to silence you and Mr. Suidani?
I think if they silence us and nothing happens, that would be a big victory for them and the system that they support, in this case communism. So if they silence us and nobody comes to our aid or nobody stood out and said that's not on, there is possibility and highly likely they will spread the same thing in the region, in this case the Pacific region, because they feel they have a strong foothold in the Solomons and they can have that place as a stepping place to do other things in the region, even against bigger countries like Australia, New Zealand, or even United States.
I think what's really important in this is, even if Sogavare gets kicked out of office, the real problem isn't Sogavare, it's the Chinese Communist Party, and in particular the money China spreads around. How do you think in the Solomon Islands and elsewhere people can go after the money? Particularly in the Solomon Islands, where do you cut off that supply of?
I think most of our banking systems, or where big monies will be sort of put, would be in our neighboring countries like New Zealand, Australia, and they, I believe, has more sophisticated ways of finding out who's putting money where or investing where. So that would be the place should take action in support of what is happening in the Solomons, especially money that may not be clean. So they should ensure that whatever comes to them or whatever is invested in them from other places, maybe in Solomons or from other countries, has to be clean, not just taking in money for the sake of taking money, but make sure what is invested in Australia or New Zealand has to be clean, has to have clean sources, not just helping themselves to have the money deposited in their bank accounts in Australia or New Zealand.
And is Australia or New Zealand doing anything?
Well, so far, in terms of what has been happening with Malaysia until now and the things that have happened in Solomons, they have been supporting the normal way of doing things. Government is the government. You have to support the government of the day. So I think that's what's been happening. Hopefully, there are other support through other NGOs, things like that would filter through to the people other than the government.
And as I understand it, Sogavare's nephew is a convicted criminal and lives in Australia. Is that correct?
So Robson Djokovic's records have shown in Australia that he has had criminal records back in Australia. And one other interesting thing is he is a citizen of Australia, but he has broken the laws in the Solomons in terms of the Electoral Act. So he has taken the matter to court. He appealed these matters. He keep on losing. But surprise, surprise, he's still with the Prime Minister's office. So in fact, at one stage, I actually asked one of the Australian officials, why are you keeping a criminal in our place? He should be kicked out, like you did with Moti. And he has this long explanation about procedures and whatnot.
I see. When we were in D.C. together, we had a chance to talk to some Uyghur women who had families in the concentration camps or were in the concentration camps themselves. And I think one thing we noticed is there are some disturbing parallels between what happened in Xinjiang, East Turkestan, and what's happening now in the Solomon Islands.
Exactly. I was shocked, actually, really shocked about when this one of them was explaining the situation, the friendliness, the acceptance of the promises that was made to the people
at the beginning,
the
promises of development.
Yes, that's exactly what is happening in Solomon. So for me, it was like, wow, this is something real, something that these people experience in their places. And down the line, things turn differently. And one of the victims that explained the situation with his father, spent his life saving the country, China, then ended up being, not supported or being even criminalized at the end. So those parallels, indigenous communities, friendliness, acceptance, that's exactly what is happening in the Solomons now. Money, not principles. Development, not carefulness. So that is exactly what is, because of the story yesterday, that parallel is real for us in the Solomons.
It's amazing what Chinese money can cost.
To be honest, I was sitting there and I said that of all things, this is satanic. This is beyond evil. How could another human being does these things to another human being? After all, we have only one life to live. Why should we destroy another person's life for some other things apart from, people need, I suppose humanity is better off helping each other, not destroying each other.
I hope that's something you get to ask Sogavare when you see him next. Well, what is next for you?
Well, I'm actually vying for to be a politician. I will be standing for election in the Solomons in my constituency, and that has been made known to the people. That I felt the only way, or one of the ways, to save the country is to get into office and be part of a solution rather than be part of the problem.
Are you expecting any major backlash from all your activism?
Of course. That would even make me bolder, because when there is goodness, there is always evil. And I have had the experience so far. If I'm still alive and breathe, I'll continue.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very
Congratulations
much.
on everything.
Thank you very much for meeting you in person. It's been a pleasure indeed.
Thank you for watching. Remember, we couldn't have brought Mr. Suidani and Mr. Talifilu to Washington without support from viewers like you. This entire show would not be possible without support from viewers like you. So if you can, for just $1 an episode, you can ensure China Uncensored continues to fight the good fight by supporting us on patreon.com/China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell, and thank you.